Hello there, my name is Ben Walker and I'm here today with the help of Promise Yourself to talk to you about some things that we're just not taught about at school. Now this could be anything ranging from buying a house, mortgages, renting, saving money, budgeting, but today I'm talking about the different types of debt. Now, debt's something that many people have to deal with at some point in their life, be that credit card, a mortgage, or student loans. There's a whole wide variety of debts, but it can be boiled down to four main types. Now the first one I'm going to mention is secured debt. Now a secured debt is, very simply put, when you take out a loan and use an asset as collateral for that loan. This can be done two ways. First of all, it can be an asset that you already own, using it to be used as collateral. For example, if you have if you take out a secured credit card and you have a set amount of cash set out to the side, you can use that cash as collateral for your secured credit card. Now the reason you may do this could be because they may be offering you lower interest fees on the secured credit card compared to a normal credit card. But of course that completely depends on your circumstances. The other way of doing it is to use the asset that you're trying to buy as collateral for the loan. For example, a mortgage. If you're trying to buy a house and you have to take out a mortgage to do that, then the house that you're buying is collateral for that mortgage. So the reason why secured loans work essentially is because rather than unsecured, the lender has significantly lower risk for that loan. That means that you can borrow much larger amounts, normally at a lower rate if an unsecured lender was trying to offer you the same amount. I'm not saying that unsecured lenders will always be more expensive and they won't always be able to offer large amounts of money, but typically secured loans offer lower interest rates. But again, that completely depends on your circumstances. So what you're doing is you're lowering the risk, because if you can't repay the entire secured loan, what the lender can then do is take your asset and use that to get their money back. So it's very important to remember that if you are taking out a secured loan, whatever you're using as collateral for the loan is then at risk. If you don't keep up repayments, the lender will take your asset, you will lose that. So if you take out a mortgage on a house, you own the house, but then you can't keep up with repayments, the lender's taking your house. There's no other way around it unless you somehow manage to negotiate with your lender an alternative. Now, secured loans sound great, but like I said, there is an element of risk. The other side of the coin is unsecured loans. Now, these are loans where you don't need collateral to take out the loan, but they do have quite a few different types of requirements. For example, unsecured lenders typically take a much longer look into your credit history. Now, everyone has a credit history, whether that be good or whether it be bad, everyone has one. And when you're taking out an unsecured loan, the chances are the lender's going to generate their own credit report based off your borrowing history. So if you've never borrowed any money before, you've never proven that you can repay the money you borrow. So that's why it's always worth just getting a credit card, maybe making a purchase on it once every now and then that you know you can repay. Don't make a purchase on it that you don't think you can repay, because then of course you're just getting into debt and then that's going to look bad on your credit history. But each lender will generate their own report, and their credit report will have a much larger sway essentially on whether or not you're eligible for borrowing. Now, if you're not sure about your credit scores or credit reports, I've done a full video and guide about credit scores. I'd recommend going and checking that out. That way you can learn a little bit more about that as well. Now, one thing you have to remember, if you do have an unsecured debt, you can't just miss payments because there's no collateral. You have to still keep making repayments. First of all, the interest, it would be very high. And at the end of the day, you are going to have to repay. You could get charged extra fees for not repaying on time, or in the worst case scenario, the lender could take you to court and then attempt to claim some of your assets that way. And because of course you wouldn't have paid for a while, the interest fees would mean that it'd just be so much more than you'd be expecting to repay. So just make sure that when you are taking out an unsecured loan, you know exactly what you're doing. There's a wide variety of lenders out there that may offer an unsecured loan, but you really want to make sure, for any loan really, you're talking to an expert who really knows what they're talking about. So they can identify exactly what your circumstances, your requirements need. So have a little look around, see if you can find any good places that can offer you some advice and maybe offer you some help along that road as well. So the next type I'm going to mention is revolving debt. Now, revolving debt works a little bit differently to the other types. It's a good example of this is a credit card, because simply put, it's money that you can borrow, repay up to a certain limit. For example, if you have a £1,000 credit limit on your credit card, you can then borrow up to £1,000 as long as you repay it all, and then you can borrow back up to £1,000 again, repay, but you don't have to repay it all at once. You can just never go above that credit limit. So you could borrow 1,000, repay 200, borrow another 200, repay 400, borrow 400, as long as you don't go above that £1,000 mark. Now, one thing to bear in mind is generally they come with quite high interest rates, revolving debts do. So if you are going to borrow any money off this revolving debt type, for example, using your credit card, you want to make sure that you're paying off that balance as soon as you can. If you start paying back in installments, so if you borrow 800, repay 200, you're still going to owe another £600, and you will be charged interest on that £600. So just make sure that you know exactly what's going on. Some credit cards, for example, offer interest-free periods where you won't be charged interest on that amount for a set amount of time. So just make sure if you do have one of those, you know when that period is ending, read all the fine print, know what you're getting into, and I'm sure you'll be absolutely fine. Now, the final type I'm going to mention is installment debt. This is kind of similar to revolving debt, except it's not. So basically the way it works is you borrow a set amount for a set amount of time, you pay it down in installments, so you know exactly what you're going to pay, when you're going to pay it, for how long you're going to pay it. A good example of this would be a mortgage, because like I said, you borrow, let's say you're buying a house, it's worth £200,000, you need to borrow £150,000. So the loan you're borrowing is £150,000, you're paying it back over 25 years, and then they'll figure out how much interest you owe over that time period, and then figure out what your payments would be from there each month over the 25 years. So with an installment debt, you know exactly how much you're going to pay, when you're going to pay it. Now, installment debts can be either secured or unsecured. It can happen both ways, whereas revolving debt generally is more just unsecured. Now, of course, this can all be a little bit difficult to understand because you have secured and unsecured debt, and then you have revolving installment, and they kind of all mash all together in different ways. But to put it simply, revolving debt is normally unsecured, and then installment debt can be either. So if you are confused, read the guide that goes along with this. That'll offer you a little bit more information and delve into it a little bit deeper, so hopefully you can learn a little bit more. Now, this video has very simply gone through the basic types of debt. It's very important that when you are thinking about taking out some debt, taking out a loan, you know exactly what you're getting yourself into. You need to read all the fine print because it can have a massive impact both on your life in the near future and the far future. For example, if you can't repay a loan, it'll have a big impact on your credit score, which could then have a massive impact on whether or not you can borrow again in the near future or the far future. So it's really worth considering every aspect of the loan you're going to take out before you actually do. Now, if you are in a point where you think, right, I've already got some debt, or I don't really want to get into debt, there are organisations out there which may be able to offer you some free advice. Organisations like National Debt Line or Step Change. Get in touch with them and they should be able to point you in the right direction, what would work right for you. Failing that, of course, there are other organisations, but if you are going to try and find a lender, make sure they're FCA regulated. That's very important because the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, have got loads of rules and regulations set out to protect consumers. So make sure that any lender you do go with is FCA regulated, and that way you'll be able to stay nice and safe, and the FCA is there to look after you. They're not the big bad, well, they are the big bad for the businesses, but not for the consumer. Now, as I've said a couple of times in this video, it's very important to remember that if you use an asset to secure a loan, that asset is at risk. Make sure you don't risk anything you're not really willing to lose, and you're always keeping up with your repayments. There are a lot of options out there for lenders. There's high street, there's specialists, there's payday, there's all sorts. So don't get overwhelmed, just make a snap decision. You need to systematically work through what you need and find a lender that matches your requirements. Like I said, talking to a financial advisor could be a massive, massive help. My name's been Ben Walker. Hopefully you've learned something. Feel free to like and subscribe. Watch around for the next videos that are coming out, and I'll see you guys again next time.